How do you permanently change a state's constitution without most people even realizing it's happening? Well, we're going to take a look at Georgia, where it turns out the most powerful vote is often the one that's never even cast.
Let's start with this number, 501,879. In just one election, that's more than 500,000 people. 500,000 voters who showed up, they voted for president, and then, for one really important question, they just kind of vanished. So how in the world does that happen? And more importantly, what does it mean for the power of everyone else's vote? Okay, so picture this. It's Georgia's 2020 general election. Nearly 5 million people cast their vote for president. But on the very same ballot, there was a key constitutional amendment, and over 500,000 of those same voters didn't weigh in on it at all. Now, this isn't just about people being tired or uninterested. No, this is the fuel for a powerful and pretty much invisible machine.
To really get what's going on here, we need to talk about a phenomenon that political scientists have a name for.
It's called ballot roll-off, and honestly, it's pretty much what it sounds like. A voter is super engaged at the top for president, for governor, but as they scroll down that long ballot past all the complicated legal questions, their participation just rolls off.
And look, we're not talking about a small effect here. You can see it in the data. Back in 2018, nearly 230,000 voters skipped an amendment. Fast forward to the 2020 presidential race, and that number more than doubled to over 500,000. This happens, because these questions way down the ballot are often super technical, they use dense legal language, it's classic voter fatigue. But here's the thing. In Georgia, this fatigue isn't just some side effect. It's actually central to how the whole system works.
And that brings us to the absolute core of this machine. The power of all those non-votes isn't about what they say, it's about how they're counted, or more accurately, how they are not counted.
You see, Georgia's constitution has this one critical little phrase. It says an amendment passes if it gets a majority of the votes cast thereon. Thereon, that means only the people who actually mark yes or no get included in the final count. So what about that 500,000 people who skipped it? They're totally excluded from the math. They don't count as a no. They just disappear.
So here's the crucial point. We all kind of expect that for something big to pass, a majority of everyone who showed up to vote has to agree, right? But the reality in Georgia is that you only need a majority of a much, much smaller group. Just the folks who actually made it to the bottom of the ballot and made a choice. So when hundreds of thousands of people don't vote on it, it becomes way, way easier for a smaller, really motivated group to pass huge structural changes to the state's constitution.
Okay, so now that we get what the non-vote effect is, let's pull back the curtain and look at how this whole system is engineered to make it as big as possible.
Yeah, this doesn't happen by accident. It really does work like a machine with 3 specific gears all turning together. Let's break them down one by one.
The first gear is just so simple, but man, is it effective. Placement. These dense, legally complex questions are almost always shoved at the very end of a really long ballot. I mean, think about it. After you've voted for president, senator, and all your local officials, you're tired. This placement basically guarantees that more people will just skip the hard stuff at the end.
All right, the second gear is language engineering. Whoever gets to write the ballot question, and that's often the state's top political leaders, gets to frame the whole issue. They can make it sound simple or positive or even a little misleading. It's a strategy that decouples the question you read from what it actually does. For example, get a load of this actual ballot question from 2012. It sounds fantastic, doesn't it? It's using words like allow, local approval, and request of local communities. It sounds like it's giving more power to local communities.
But the reality was the total opposite. The amendment actually created a new state-level commission that could approve charter schools even if the local elected school board said no. It stripped them of their authority. So that positive language completely hid the fact that it was actually centralizing power at the state level.
And the final gear is timing. Now, this one might sound a little backward at first, but these amendments are almost always put on high turnout general election ballots. Why? Well, more voters means more casual voters, which means more ballot roll-off. It actually maximizes the non-vote effect, letting a small, dedicated group pass their amendment while everyone else is focused on the big, flashy races.
So what happens when this machine gets used over and over and over again? Well, you don't just pass a few laws. You fundamentally rewrite the state's entire operating system, often in ways that lock in a very specific political agenda for generations to come.
I mean, just look at the machine's output.
In 2014, an amendment framed as just prohibiting tax increases actually put the state in a permanent fiscal straitjacket. In 2016, a measure to reform how judges are disciplined actually resulted in the legislature taking over the process. Then in 2018, an amendment to improve efficiency created what its critics call a two-tiered justice system that favors big business. See the pattern? A quiet, huge structural change passed under the cover of simple, positive language.
The source material for this explainer really puts it perfectly. The goal isn't just about winning today's policy debates. It's about using the Constitution to make sure your side can't possibly lose tomorrow's. So, okay, what's the long-term damage of building a constitution this way? Well, it creates a system that gets more and more rigid and more resistant to the will of the people over time.
The thing is, these changes are basically set in stone. The bar to pass an amendment in the first place is really high. You need a two-thirds vote in the legislature. But guess what? The bar to repeal one is exactly the same. In today's political climate, getting two-thirds of politicians to agree to undo something, well, it's pretty much impossible. Once these changes are in, they are effectively permanent.
This creates what's known as the ratchet effect. Think of a tool, a ratchet, that only clicks forward. It can't turn back. It's super easy to get voters to say yes to a tax cap when the economy is good. But then a crisis hits, a pandemic, a natural disaster, and the state desperately needs that money for schools or hospitals. Too bad? The Constitution now legally forbids it. The ratchet won't turn back.
And the final result of all this is what analysts call constitutional petrification. The state's founding document goes from being a flexible guide for governing to a rigid rulebook of policy restrictions. A new majority of voters can win an election, but they can't actually govern the way they want to because their hands are tied by a constitution that was reshaped, often by a minority, years or even decades before they ever got there.
It really forces us to ask a pretty fundamental question. If the most important document in a state can be permanently changed by taking advantage of the quiet absence of hundreds of thousands of voters, who does that Constitution really speak for?